The mornings began before the light reached the thatched roof, before the birds stirred in the trees or the market women yawned awake. While the village still slept, Adan would rise, her body aching from the straw mat she lay on, her feet already remembering the stones that waited by the stream. She did not complain. Complaints were for those who had someone to listen. She had no one. The pot was heavy even when empty, its curved rim cold against her back as she tied it into place with the faded strip of cloth she had saved from her mother's wrapper. Her mother, whose voice she could no longer summon clearly, had taught her to balance the pot before she was tall enough to see over the compound wall. "Balance your pain the same way," her mother had whispered once during a rare moment of peace, quietly, steadily, without spilling. Each day Adan walked the same path to the stream, her toes curling around the familiar curves of the dirt, dodging roots and stones by memory. The dawn air was gentle, cool, the silence unbroken. It was the only part of the day that belonged to her, and even that she carried on borrowed time. The stream did not laugh with her. It did not sing. It merely received her, quiet and still, letting her kneel at its edge and dip her pot until it was full and straining. The moment the water touched her skin, it seized her bones with cold. But she welcomed it. She told herself that if she could survive this chill, she could survive the rest. She had no idea how much colder things would become. By the time she returned, the sun was lifting. The roosters had begun their calls and Igioma, her stepsister, was already awake. Adan could hear her voice from the compound wall, whining about insects, about the smell of palm oil, about how her bed mat hadn't been soft enough. Igioma's mother, who was now Adan's stepmother, merely cooed and clucked, as if Igioma had survived a war overnight instead of a breeze. "Adan," came the call. Adan said nothing. She did not have to. Her footsteps quickened. She passed through the gate with the pot of water sloshing against her back. Her arms were shaking from the weight. Her palms, rubbed raw from the coarse cloth of the binding, had already begun to blister. In the center of the yard stood Igioma, wrapped in a silk cloth dyed the color of ripe pawpaw, her hair still tied up in thick braids adorned with coral beads. She was older by only a year, but she moved like someone who had never tasted consequence. She saw Adan and wrinkled her nose. "You took long," she said. Adan bowed slightly. "The water was far today." "It is always far," Igioma said, rolling her eyes. "But it doesn't take me that long when I go." "Oh wait," she paused, mock surprise in her voice. "I've never had to go." Laughter. Cold. Show. Not just from Igioma, but from the two friends who had appeared behind her like shadows. They often came early, these girls, to watch what they called the morning show. Sometimes they brought roasted groundnuts. Sometimes oranges. Always they brought cruelty. Adan placed the pot down carefully and began to pour the water into the calabash basin. "Don't spill it," Igioma warned. "My skin does not drink dirt." The bathing began. Always the same. Adan kneeling, scooping water, soaping Igioma's back with a sponge cut from dried loofah. Igioma stretched her arms and hummed, occasionally pointing to a spot Adan had missed. Her voice was sharp when she spoke. Sharper still when her friends made a joke. "Did you scrub your own feet with that sponge first?" one of the girls said. "No," Adan said quietly. "Too bad," the other said. "You look like you need it more." More laughter. Adan kept her head bowed. She scrubbed the soles of Igioma's feet, even as the water splashed on her torn wrapper and the soap stung the small cuts on her knuckles. Her hands shook, not from cold anymore, but from the long-held pain that had nowhere else to go. The water always felt colder when Igioma was near. She couldn't explain it. Even under the sun, the stream water turned to ice against her skin when she used it for Igioma. She sometimes wondered if the stream itself knew who it served, or if the spirits in the water recoiled when poured over cruelty. "Her hands are too rough," Igioma complained. "Like yam peel." "Scrub gentler, bush girl." Adan said nothing. The soap dripped from her fingers. She adjusted the sponge. "Speak when you're spoken to," Igioma snapped. "Yes," Adan murmured. Not an apology. Just an answer. Igioma leaned back, stretching like a lazy cat. Her arms lifted so high the beads in her braids clicked. "Do my hair too," she said. "Rinse it with what's left. I don't want dry ends like yours." Adan obeyed. She took the last of the water, now murky from bathing, and poured it over Igioma's thick braids. She massaged the scalp carefully, slowly, though her own hair remained tangled and dry, never washed with warm water, never combed with care. Her hands burned as if they'd been dipped in pepper. Her shoulders screamed. But she kept going. When it was done, Igioma stood, flung water off her limbs like a bird, and stepped away without a word of thanks. The friends followed. One dropped her orange peel on the ground by Adan's feet. None of them looked back. Adan sat there for a moment, still holding the empty basin, her fingers curling around its rim like it might save her. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting gold across the yard, but the chill inside her had not left. It never did. Later, while washing the calabash and scrubbing the spilled soap from the floor, Adan's stepmother called her into the kitchen. The woman's voice was sugar over thorns. "Did you fetch enough firewood for tonight?" "No, Mama. I haven't gone yet." "Then go now. You've been idle long enough." Adan nodded. Her muscles cried. Her back bent under the idea of carrying anything else. But she said nothing. She picked up the basket and made her way into the trees. As she walked, she glanced at her hands. The blisters were growing, little bubbles of pain that promised to burst later in her sleep. She wondered, just briefly, if her real mother would have held those hands, wrapped them in oil, whispered prayers over them. She gathered sticks in silence, ignoring the ache, ignoring the voices that lingered in her ears. Agioma's voice. The laughter. The mockery. On the way back she passed the stream again. The water shimmered like glass under the light, innocent and smooth. She sat by the edge, basket at her side, and dipped her hands in. The cold made her flinch. She looked at her reflection, tired, thin, with eyes too old for her years. Then a ripple. The reflection moved without her. She blinked. It was gone. She told herself she was just tired. But the chill stayed in her bones long after she left the water behind. That night, as she lay on her mat, curled tightly, she heard Igioma laughing in the next room. Her stepmother laughing too. The sound echoed like sharp teeth against the inside of her skull. She didn't sleep easily. But eventually she dreamed, of water that boiled when it touched cruelty, of hands that grew wings instead of blisters, of laughter that could be caught and drowned. In the morning, before light returned, she rose again. The pot waited for her. The stream waited. The weight was no lighter. But she lifted it anyway. Not because she was strong. Because she had no choice. And still, the water felt colder when Igioma was near. It began with a sting, a whisper of pain so light that Adan thought it might have been her imagination. The bar of soap was the same they'd always used, pale brown, coarse, crumbling at the corners from long use and wet fingers. But when she picked it up that morning to begin Igioma's bath, her fingers recoiled as if the soap had turned to fire. The sting faded as quickly as it came, and she clenched her jaw, forcing her hand back down. She dipped it into the water and began to scrub. Igioma was already complaining. The water was too cold, the soap too rough, and Adan's touch too stupid to be a girl's. She sat like a queen on the low wooden stool in the compound, her legs spread so Adan could reach behind her knees, her arms resting dramatically across her lap, fingers adorned in cheap gold rings that gleamed in the morning sun. Her voice dripped with boredom. "Scrub harder," she snapped, slapping her own thigh. "What are you even doing back there? Massaging me for sleep?" Adan didn't respond. She couldn't. She was too focused on keeping her hand steady. The soap stung again, this time sharper. It felt like little teeth had sprouted from the bar, biting into the blisters that had never fully healed from the week before. She pressed harder, just enough to satisfy Igioma but not enough to scream. "Did you not eat?" Igioma barked. "Your arms are moving like cooked noodles." "I'm sorry," Adan whispered. "Sorry for what?" "For being slow." "Well, you should be. This is why no one will ever marry you. Look at you. Skin like old bark. No grace. No voice. Just dirty hands and downcast eyes. If I were you, I would stay inside and never show my face." Adan rinsed the sponge and poured water slowly over Igioma's shoulders. The water that day was warm. She'd boiled it first as a small kindness, but now her own hands burned more than the flames that had heated the pot. The soap felt like poison. She wished she could drop it and run, but she stayed. She always stayed. Her fingers had begun to swell by the next morning, red and taut like overripe tomatoes. When she tried to curl them, the skin cracked slightly at the knuckles. But Igioma was waiting as she always did, wrapped in embroidered cloth and flanked by her mocking friends. There was no room for pain. "You're limping," Igioma said, frowning. "Are you sick?" "No." "Good. I need you to scrub my back today until it shines. I'm going to the market and everyone must see that I glow." Adan nodded and began. The sponge was soaked and the soap was foaming. Her fingers screamed. With each motion, circle, rinse, circle, the sting deepened. The top layer of skin was beginning to peel. Thin strands of flesh slid off when she moved too quickly. She could feel the raw skin underneath, hot and trembling. Igioma didn't notice. Or she did and didn't care. Harder. That part still smells like sweat. Adan scrubbed. Again. You're too soft. She scrubbed again. Ugh. Look at your face. So ugly when you try. She didn't stop. Her breath came out in quiet hisses. She willed herself not to cry, not in front of them, not in front of Igioma. When the bath ended, she dragged herself to the water pot and washed her hands carefully, hiding them behind her wrapper when others passed. The skin along her palms was bright pink now, angry and weeping. Her nails were etched in red. The soap had done its work and it was not finished. That night she tried to sleep with her hands tucked in cool cloth. She stole a bit of coconut oil from the kitchen, rubbed it gently on her fingers, but it stung more than soothed. She dreamed of worms wriggling through her palms. She dreamed of fire licking her knuckles. When she woke, her hands were damp and slick with pus. Still, the next morning she walked to the stream. Still she boiled the water. Still she picked up the soap. The pain was a constant now. It pulsed with every heartbeat, humming under her skin like a curse. Her arms trembled each time she lifted the sponge. She began to miss spots on Igioma's back and feet, and each time she did, Igioma's voice lashed out. Are you stupid? No, Igioma. Then act like you have a brain. She scrubbed until her skin peeled in sheets, until she bled onto the sponge, until the basin water turned faintly pink, and still, no one noticed. Except her mother. She saw her watching from the doorway one morning, her brows furrowed slightly. Adan looked down quickly, ashamed. She hid her hands behind her back when she passed. But her mother didn't ask. Didn't stop her. Only said, when they were alone in the kitchen later, "This is your place." That was all. No oil. No cloth. No salve or secret mercy. Just the dry voice of someone who had survived too long to pity weakness. Adan wanted to scream. She wanted to cry and beg and show her palms to the sky. But she nodded and said, "Yes, Mama?" Because what else could she say? The next week, the skin on her hands turned dark in patches. Not from sun but from rot. The wounds no longer bled. They oozed. The fingernails on her thumbs turned black. She began using only her fingers and the back of her wrists to hold the soap, but even that brought no relief. The soap had taken root in her body, crawling up her arms like vines. Igioma laughed when she saw the sores. "You should see yourself," she said. "You look like a leper." Adan said nothing. "Maybe we should call you Scab Girl. Or better, Soap Girl." She laughed, snorting. "Even soap doesn't like you. It's trying to burn you away." Her friends cackled. One mimicked Adan's hunched posture. Another took the sponge and dabbed it against her arm with exaggerated horror. They laughed until they were breathless. Then they left. Adan waited until the yard was empty. She sat near the fire pit, hands trembling in her lap. She took the bar of soap, looked at it, harmless, small, a wedge of brown shaped like any other. But it was a monster now. It had teeth. It had a voice. And it had chosen her for its feast. She could not stop bathing Igioma. If she refused, she would be beaten. If she complained, she would be mocked. If she cried, she would be told to hush and scrub harder. That evening, she sat by the stream longer than usual. She did not fetch water. She simply watched it pass, smooth and silent. The same stream that gave her the cold water now carried her pain away in whispers. She dipped her hands in and let them float. The coolness offered a moment's mercy. But when she returned home, the soap was waiting. She began wrapping her hands in cloth before each bath, layers of old rags tied around her palms to protect the flesh. But the rags soaked quickly. The soap found a way through. The more she wrapped, the more Igioma complained. "Why are your hands dressed like that?" she demanded. "I cut them on firewood." "Then be careful. Don't ruin my skin with your dirt." Adan nodded. She wanted to burn the soap, to bury it, to run from it. But she didn't. She couldn't. The village women began to whisper when they saw her hands in the market. "What's wrong with her? Is it a sickness? Does she wash corpses in secret? Does she play with spirits at night?" Flinching. One night she couldn't sleep from the ache. She sat outside, fingers soaking in a bowl of cool oil, and stared at the stars. Her mother came out, stood behind her. She didn't ask about the wounds. She didn't touch her shoulder. She only said, "Better to have pain in your hands than in your heart." Adan didn't answer. But she thought, what if the pain is already in both? The heat had not lifted all day. It clung to the compound walls, sat heavy on the backs of chickens, and buzzed inside Adan's skull like trapped flies. Even the stream had seemed tired when she went that morning. Its flow had slowed, the water slightly murky as if it too were sick of being summoned before the sun. Her shoulders ached from carrying 2 full pots instead of 1. Igioma had insisted on a second bath after spilling palm oil on herself during lunch, flinging her arms dramatically as if it had been blood. So Adan boiled more water. She gathered fresh leaves to scrub the courtyard. She washed the rags she'd used to wrap her hands, though the cloth was beginning to stick to her skin with each peel. Now, as dusk turned the sky orange and violet, she knelt by the basin again. Igioma stood with her arms lifted like wings, already bored. Her hips were cocked to one side, her mouth full of half-chewed kola nut, and her eyes drooped as if even complaining took effort now. "Scrub well," she said lazily. "There's a spot under my arm that smells." Adan nodded and began. Her fingers, bound loosely in new rags, throbbed from the first touch of water. The sponge felt like bark against her skin. The soap, which she had tried to replace with ash and leaf that morning, had mysteriously reappeared, the same bar chipped and sharp-edged like a bone fragment. She scrubbed. Her arms moved automatically, up and down, round and round like they had every day for months. The basin rippled with water, clear at first. Her eyes were on Igioma's skin, the small birthmark under her ribcage, the mosquito bite near her elbow, not the water. Until Igioma shifted and muttered, "What's that color?" Adan blinked. Her gaze dropped. In the center of the basin the water had changed. Pale pink. No red. Not in streaks or dots. It was blooming from beneath the sponge, curling in tendrils like smoke. "Are you on your period?" Igioma snapped, stepping back in disgust. "Ugh. You're bleeding into the water." Adan checked quickly, but her wrapper was dry. Her thighs were clean. And the blood wasn't coming from Igioma either. She looked again, heart rising into her throat. The water swirled again, a deeper red now. Almost black. I don't think it's," she began. Igioma slapped the sponge from her hand. "Are you cursed?" The water sloshed violently in the basin, but it didn't splash over. It rose slightly as if something underneath had pushed it up. Adan stepped back instinctively. "I'm going to tell Mama," Igioma said. "You've put witchcraft in the soap." No, But she was already gone, wrapper flapping, wet footprints slapping the ground. Alone in the courtyard, Adan stared at the basin. The water had stilled again, but it had not cleared. A thick red hue floated in the center, unmoving, untouched by wind. Her reflection had vanished beneath it. Her hands began to throb. She unwrapped the rags slowly, carefully. The cloth peeled back like old bark from a tree, stuck to her skin by dried blood. The gashes along her palms had deepened, but deeper than they had been that morning. Her right hand had split at the base of her thumb. The skin was not merely torn, it was missing. Gone in patches. What remained was soft, dark flesh that pulsed gently in the dimming light. The blood was hers. That was certain now. But it didn't explain why the basin hadn't drained when she poured it out. Because she had poured it. Twice. She had lifted the basin earlier and tipped its contents into the drainage gutter. She'd seen the water hit the earth. She had watched the rivulets run down into the dark soil, and still, here it was again, full to the brim, swirling red. Her stomach twisted. She stepped forward, barefoot, knees shaking. She reached into the basin, fingers trembling, and dipped her hand into the water. The cold was immediate. Like the stream in mid-Harmattan. Her bones recoiled. Her blood felt as if it reversed direction. And then something touched her hand. She snatched her arm back, stumbling and falling backward. The basin didn't tip. It didn't even wobble. She stared, breath jagged in her throat. She had felt fingers. Not a fish. Not a twig. Fingers. Long, smooth, deliberate. They had slid between her own and then retreated. Not by accident. Not by wave. They had been waiting. She scrambled to her feet, eyes wide, backing away slowly. Her heart slammed like a pestle against her ribs. Her stepmother appeared moments later, Igioma behind her, smirking. "What nonsense is this?" the woman snapped, eyes falling on the basin. "What foolishness are you spreading now?" Adan opened her mouth, but her voice caught. "She's bleeding into the water," Igioma said with exaggerated disgust. "And the basin, Mama, it's not even emptying." "She said the soap is cursed," Igioma added. "Or maybe it's her. Maybe her hands have spoiled everything." The woman stepped forward, hands on her hips. She looked down into the basin. She saw the color. She saw the water. She saw the tremble in Adan's arms. She exhaled through her nose. "Clean it." "But, Mama." "Clean it. Wash the basin. Scrub it until it shines." And if it turns red again, scrub harder. Adan looked at the basin. It had gone still again. A thick red pool resting like breath held beneath the surface. I don't think it wants to be emptied, she said softly before she could stop herself. The slap came quickly. Sharp across her left cheek. Not brutal but dismissive. This is your place, her mother said. And if your place is stained, then scrub your place clean. They left her there. Adan stood alone again, pulse trembling. The stars had begun to peek through the dusk sky. The fireflies were beginning their glow. She walked to the kitchen, fetched a gourd of hot water and returned. The basin was still full. She poured the water. Nothing changed. The blood didn't dissipate. The water didn't cool. It didn't spill over the edge. It simply waited. That night, sleep came in bursts. She curled her body tightly on her mat, her hands bound in cloth, oiled with a stolen blend of bitter leaf and charcoal ash. Her head throbbed where the slap had landed. Her fingers twitched on their own. And then came the dream. She stood by the stream, but the water was gone. In its place was a basin. Enormous, as wide as the sky, filled with red water that stretched into the horizon. She stood on its edge, barefoot, the wind cold and loud. And then came the hands. Dozens of them. Pale, thin, hairless. They floated just beneath the surface, reaching upward. Not violently. Not clawing. Just reaching. She recognized some of them. One bore the woven bracelet her mother used to wear. Another had the calloused knuckles of her late grandmother. A third looked just like her own, but whole, unbroken, unstained. They didn't grab her. They only opened their palms, waiting. She stepped back. And behind her, a voice, quiet, familiar. You gave them your pain. She turned. No one. You gave them your pain. But you didn't ask what they'll do with it. She woke with a gasp. Her hands were slick with sweat. Or blood. She couldn't tell. She crept outside. The basin was gone. The courtyard was empty, swept, quiet. Only the wet stain on the earth remained, dark, wide, perfectly round. She stared at it until dawn. And when Igioma woke, whining for her bath, Adan's fingers moved without her. They scrubbed. But her eyes stayed on the spot where the basin had bled. The cloth had always been silent. Rough, torn from the hem of an old wrapper, it held no secrets. It was a tool, nothing more. Its coarse weave had bruised Adan's palms for weeks, soaking in the soap that peeled her fingers, the filth scraped from Igioma's skin, the tears she dared not let fall. It was never washed with the rest of the laundry. It lived beside the basin like a chained dog, waiting for its daily beatings. But that morning it trembled. Adan noticed it first as she poured warm water into the basin, steam curling up into the pale dawn air. Her eyes, heavy with sleep, darted downward at the soft sound. A rustling. She thought it might be the wind or a lizard scurrying past. But no, the washcloth, folded neatly where she always left it on the low wooden stool, was moving. Not blowing. Trembling. Like it was breathing. She approached slowly, heart quickening. Her fingers hesitated just above the damp fabric. A tiny voice inside her begged her not to touch it. The same voice that had screamed when the basin bled, when her hands split open, when the soap hissed beneath her skin. But she didn't listen. She never did. She picked up the cloth. And heard it. A whisper. Dreadful. Not like a voice outside the ear, but something inside it, brushing against her bones like wind in an empty gourd. You cleanse what should remain unclean. Her hand jerked. The cloth dropped. Her heart thumped painfully against her ribs. She stood frozen, staring down at it. It lay still now as if nothing had happened. No more movement. No more whisper. She looked around. The compound was empty. Chickens scratched quietly in a corner. Smoke curled from the kitchen hut. The others were still asleep. Her hands trembled worse than the cloth had. She knelt, picked it up again cautiously. Nothing. No voice. No heat. No pulse. Just a damp rag fraying at the edges. But the word stayed inside her. You cleanse what should remain unclean. What had it meant? That Igioma's skin was sacred? That her filth was meant to stay? That Adan's daily suffering was not just meaningless, but wrong? She shook her head and dipped the cloth into the warm water. The scent of boiled leaves and lye rose faintly. She rubbed it once between her fingers. The burn was there, less sharp today but familiar. She wrung it out and turned toward the bath. Igioma was already seated on the stool, wrapper hanging from one shoulder, arms crossed, lips pursed. Her face bore the irritation of someone who had not yet been obeyed. You're late, she said. Adan dipped her head. Sorry. Make the water hotter next time. My skin needs to feel it. She nodded again and began to wash her. The first stroke landed gently. Too gently. Igioma turned her head. Did you forget how to scrub? Adan didn't answer. She didn't know why her hands had gone soft. The cloth, warm, pliant, felt almost hesitant. It glided over Igioma's back instead of scraping it. The whisper still echoed behind her eyes. You cleanse what should remain unclean. Her arms slowed, grew gentler. She moved the cloth across Igioma's skin as if touching a sleeping animal. Her breath grew shallow. The water rippled quietly. The sponge didn't foam as it used to. Her hands avoided the deeper scrubs. Adan, Igioma said sharply. Are you drunk? She blinked. Harder, Igioma hissed. Or are you trying to make me stink? Adan swallowed. Your skin is soft today. What did you say? I didn't want to hurt it. Pause. Then a slap. It came without warning, a sharp crack across her cheek. Her neck twisted. Her lip caught between her teeth. Her vision blurred for a second, not from the force but the humiliation. Her ears rang. Don't insult me, Igioma spat. You think I care about pain? Scrub harder. I want the dead skin gone. The cloth had fallen. It lay beside the basin, soaked and wrinkled. Steam rose from it. Adan stared, mouth slightly open. A hiss curled up from where the cloth touched the earthen floor, a sizzle like hot oil meeting water. She thought at first it was a trick of the steam, but the sound was unmistakable. Faint. Ongoing. The cloth was burning nothing, but it hissed like fire. Igioma hadn't noticed. She was adjusting her wrapper, muttering something under her breath about incompetence. She didn't see Adan reach down slowly, hesitantly, to retrieve the cloth again. It was hotter than before. Not boiling. Not scalding. But hot in a way that felt deliberate. As if it remembered being thrown down. As if it had a grudge. Adan held it carefully, avoiding the center, and returned to scrubbing. But she didn't go rough again. Not fully. Her hands kept their softness despite the slap. The whisper had sunk into her skin. It echoed louder now. You cleanse what should remain unclean. She didn't know whose voice it was. Male? Female? Child? Spirit? She didn't care. It had spoken to her. And somehow she knew the cloth was the mouth it had chosen. That night, she sat alone in the kitchen after the others had gone to bed. The moonlight flickered through the cracks in the wall, illuminating the folded washcloth in her lap. She hadn't dared to wash it or leave it outside. She kept it with her now, not out of duty but curiosity. Fear. Reverence. She unfolded it slowly, finger by finger. Nothing. She touched its center. Nothing. She whispered, What are you? The cloth stayed still. She tried to sleep. The dreams were different this time. She was scrubbing Igioma's skin again, but the skin didn't end. It stretched on forever, a landscape of soft flesh that went on into the dark. She kept walking, dragging the cloth behind her like a leash. Beneath her feet, the skin twitched. A mouth opened in the ground. It whispered, You cleanse what feeds them. She awoke with a start, breath ragged. The cloth was wrapped around her hand. She hadn't done that. The next morning, the compound felt too quiet. Igioma was late to rise, and when she finally emerged, her skin looked paler than usual. Her eyes darted nervously, and she scratched at her back as if something irritated her. Make the water hot, she said weakly. Adan obeyed. But this time, as she dipped the cloth into the basin, she didn't wring it out. She let it drip. She moved it gently over Igioma's arm, then paused. She felt the cloth quiver. Very slightly. Then again. Like something inside it was waking. Igioma jerked her shoulder. Are there insects in that water? No, Adan said. Then focus. But her own focus was fractured. The cloth trembled again. With each pass over Igioma's skin, the whisper grew clearer. You remove their power. Let the filth remain. Stop touching what carries memory. The voices overlapped now. Plural. Low, echoing from places her body did not know. Adan's hands faltered. The water in the basin began to darken. Igioma didn't see it. She was talking to herself now, muttering about a trip to the tailor, about new sandals. But the water deepened in color, as if something beneath it had awakened. Then the cloth twisted. Just a flick, as if a wrist moved inside it. Adan gasped and dropped it again. The cloth hit the floor and let out a crack, like dried wood breaking. Then it lay still. But a small curl of smoke rose from it. Igioma turned. What was that? Adan didn't answer. Igioma stepped forward, peered down at the cloth. It's steaming, she said, voice unsure. Did you pour something on it? No. Igioma looked at her, eyes narrowing. Are you doing something? Are you? I'm cleansing. The words slipped from Adan's mouth before she could stop them. But they didn't feel like hers. They came heavy, final, like a decree. Igioma took a step back. Adan bent down slowly, picked up the cloth. It no longer burned. But it pulsed, faintly. Alive. She folded it carefully and tucked it under her arm. That night the dreams returned. A river of skin. Eyes beneath it. Voices above it. You can stop, they said. You don't have to make her clean. And Adan, standing with the cloth in her hand, whispered back. I know. When she awoke, her hands didn't hurt. For the first time in weeks they didn't sting. Didn't blister. Didn't bleed. She touched the cloth. It hummed softly. Waiting. The morning air was thick with heat, but Adan's fingers felt nothing. She had risen early, just as always, bathed in the dim gray of dawn, fetched water from the stream that now refused to look her in the eye, boiled it carefully, watching the steam curl like sleeping snakes. Her hands, bandaged and raw, moved with their usual rhythm. But as she folded the washcloth, now brittle and humming faintly with something alive, she realized her fingertips had stopped feeling the fabric. At first she thought it was just tiredness. She rotated her wrists, flexed her fingers. They bent, sluggishly. Her palms ached, but the sensation was dull, distant. Like her hands were moving through oil. Or no, not oil, smoke. She rubbed them together, fast, until friction sparked heat. But there was no warmth. Just stiffness. Igioma was already waiting, seated like always, arms stretched out, complaining. You took long again. Are you doing this for attention now? Or is your crippled little sponge whispering to you again? Adan didn't answer. She dipped the cloth in the basin. When she wrung it, she didn't feel the water spill down her forearms. Her hands moved without her. Like they were being guided. She lifted the cloth, moved to Igioma's back and pressed it to her shoulder. That was when the cold hit. Not the kind from stream water or from early morning winds. This cold came from inside. It rushed up from her fingers, past her wrists, into her elbows like a scream running backward. Her arms locked. The cloth slipped from her grip and landed on Igioma's lap. What is wrong with you? Igioma shouted, jumping up and slapping the cloth away. You poured cold water on me, you mad girl. Adan tried to step back, but her feet stayed planted. She looked down at her hands. They had turned pale. Not just at the knuckles but entirely. The fingers were rigid, spread slightly apart, glistening with water she couldn't feel. She couldn't close them. Couldn't move them. They hung in the air like carved wood, trembling faintly in place. Her breath caught. Then Igioma screamed again. Steam rose from the basin. It hissed, slowly at first, then louder, sharper, until it roared like a kettle. The water was bubbling. Boiling. But the fire had been put out over an hour ago. Adan stared, heart pounding. Her hands still floated, unmoving, and the heat from the basin struck her cheeks like slapped palms. Bubbles bloomed in the water, dark and fast, and Igioma stumbled backward in horror. Mama. Mama Ea. Her voice split the air. The kitchen door flew open. Their stepmother rushed out, apron half-tied, hair wild. What is it now? She did something. Look at the water. The woman's eyes followed Igioma's pointing hand. She froze. The basin was rattling slightly, the boiling water climbing to the rim but never spilling, as though held in by invisible hands. The cloth floated in the center, perfectly still, untouched by the frenzy. Adan didn't speak. She froze, Igioma shrieked. She just stopped moving and then the water started boiling. I told you she's cursed. I told you she hears things. Her mother raised a hand. Igioma silenced instantly. The woman turned to Adan slowly, her mouth pressed in a tight line. Put your hands down, she ordered. Adan didn't move. I said lower your hands. She tried. Nothing happened. The woman stepped closer, peering at her fingers, her eyes narrowing. What have you done to yourself? Adan said nothing. Her lips were dry. Her arms shook slightly from the strain of holding still, though she wasn't choosing to. Her stepmother looked back at the basin. This is abomination, she said quietly. This is spirit work. She turned suddenly and barked toward the kitchen. Go and fetch the priestess. Now. We must do a cleansing before more filth settles here. But Mama. Now. Footsteps scattered. Igioma ran inside. Adan remained, statuesque, arms still raised like she was holding an invisible offering. The wind picked up, scattering ash from the cooking stones. The steam from the basin formed thin spirals, drifting lazily toward the trees. Her stepmother stood there a moment longer, then spat at the ground and walked away. Alone now, Adan breathed. Once, twice. Then slowly her right thumb twitched. Then the next finger. Then another. Her hands were thawing. Quietly. Without pain. She looked at them. They moved now freely, but not entirely by her will. They pulsed faintly, as if something had woken inside them. She lowered her arms. And when she turned back to the basin, the water had gone still. By now, Igioma refused to let Adan touch her unless someone was watching. She made it a game, forcing her to bathe her in front of her friends, laughing loudly, daring Adan to flinch. But even the others had begun to keep their distance, watching the black lines on Adan's arms as if they might crawl onto their own skin. Still, Igioma played her role, loud, cruel, smug. Until the morning of the foot washing. She had smeared her feet in red dust on purpose, walking barefoot through the goat pens just before calling Adan. Look how filthy I am, she said, sitting on the low stool beside the basin. You like dirt, don't you? Come and worship mine. The other girls giggled nervously. Adan knelt, quiet as always, cloth already soaking in the basin. Her hands, now almost completely marked, had stopped stinging weeks ago. At night, she sometimes woke to find her palms glowing faintly, not like fire but like breath. A light that didn't burn, didn't flicker, but stayed. It frightened her at first. Now it only reminded her that something was awake inside her. She dipped the cloth, wrung it, reached for Igioma's left foot. The skin there looked dry but smooth. The toenails were painted with stolen dye. The sole was cracked from walking too proudly. Adan touched the cloth to her heel. The scream came instantly. Not performative. Not dramatic. A real scream, ripped from the chest, full of pain. Igioma jerked her foot back, eyes wide, mouth open. Hot. You burned me. What did you do? Adan froze. The cloth still dripped cool water. But steam rose from Igioma's heel, slow, curling, unmistakable. A red welt had begun to bloom. The girls around them shrieked and scattered. Chickens flew in panic. A pot crashed in the kitchen. Adan dropped the cloth. I didn't. You burned me. Igioma howled, falling to her side. Which? She burned me with her hands. The stepmother ran out, eyes wild. What is this noise? She burned me. Igioma pointed. Look. The woman knelt, examined the foot. The blister was small but angry. Fresh. Real. She looked at Adan, then at the basin, then at the cloth. Where is the hot water? There was none, one of the girls whispered. She only used stream water. Then how? Adan stood. She didn't explain. No one would have believed her anyway. They never did. That evening, Igioma limped across the compound, shouting for attention. Her foot was wrapped in palm leaves and cloth, and she hissed dramatically every time it touched the ground. Her mother followed close behind, eyes scanning for any signs of another mark on Adan's arms. But Adan had vanished into the shadows. She waited until nightfall, when the noise faded and the lamps went out. In the silence, she unwrapped her hands. The symbols had deepened again, now etched in layers, not just on the surface but beneath, as if ink had soaked into her bones. And they glowed. Not with heat. With memory. She held her hands in front of her, palms open, watching the dim light they gave. Like moonlight trapped in stone. Like water dreaming of fire. She didn't feel power. She felt knowing. As if her hands had learned something her mouth was not allowed to say. She touched her own chest. Nothing burned. She touched the dirt beside her mat. It warmed slightly but did not smoke. She touched her foot. It tingled and then calmed. Not everything she touched was hurt. Only what deserved to be. She sat there until morning, hands open, glowing faintly. No one came near her for days. But even in silence, she heard Igioma whispering. She touched me. And it burned. She didn't even try to stop it. She wants to curse me. And Adan said nothing. Because she had already stopped trying to explain. She simply waited. And when the next mark appeared, just below her throat, she didn't try to scrub it off. The calabash dipped low but the water slipped away. Adan knelt beside the stream just after sunrise, the air still cool and touched by mist. Her hands reached down with practiced grace. She had done this hundreds of times. She tilted the calabash, held it just beneath the surface, and waited for the weight to fill it. But the water refused. It moved away. She blinked, confused. The stream swirled, not strongly, not like a current, but like something shy and uncertain pulling itself back from her touch. She tried again. Lowered the calabash slowly, gently. This time the water trembled, and then rose. It didn't rush into the vessel. Instead, it gathered in a tight spiral, lifting upward like a thread being spun from the earth itself. She pulled her hands back in shock. The water followed. A small coil of stream water hovered in the air between her palms, thin and perfect. It floated in a slow circle, wrapping around her wrists like a bracelet made of breath. Not a drop touched the ground. The calabash lay empty beside her. Behind her, someone gasped. Adan turned. 3 other villagers stood at the edge of the trees, each holding their own calabashes, their mouths parted in awe. One woman had a baby tied to her back. The child began to cry, softly. A boy, no older than 10, dropped his gourd into the mud without noticing. The elder among them, a bent man with deep lines carved into his cheeks, stepped forward slowly. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her hands. Then he knelt and whispered, "The hands remember." Adan didn't understand. The water still curled around her, smooth and silent, as if tasting her skin without touching it. It danced between her fingers now, faster, forming thin strands like vines, tracing the symbols inked into her flesh. Wherever it moved, her hands glowed faintly, the light returning, that soft silver shine she'd hidden at night. She stood slowly, unsure whether to be afraid. The water rose with her. Not a splash fell. It hovered. The elder lowered his head. "Who taught you the movement?" he asked. "No one," she said softly. "I only came to fetch water." "The hands remember," he repeated. "Even when the mouth forgets." By now others had arrived. Word moved faster than wind in the village. Feet rushed through the underbrush. The stream bank filled with bodies, each holding their breath, each watching the girl they had ignored and mocked carry water without carrying it at all. Igioma stood among them, one foot still limping in its binding. Her eyes were wide, mouth slightly open. "She's doing sorcery," she whispered, but no one turned to her. No one spoke. The water began to move higher, rising in a soft loop above Adan's head, turning slowly like a halo. And still her hands glowed. She wasn't doing it. She knew that. This was not will or intention. This was response. The stream was answering her body, not the girl who had once scrubbed feet and carried basins, but the thing she was becoming. A keeper. A vessel. A memory returned. The elder stepped closer. "They will try to name it. Curse it. Explain it away. But those of us who know," he lifted his eyes to hers. "We've seen it before. Long ago." "What is it?" she asked. He pointed to her hands. "They are remembering how not to serve." The water coiled again, then slipped gently back into the stream. No splash. No sound. She picked up her calabash. It was already full. They came for her at dawn. 2 of the stepmother's cousins, large men with calloused hands and unkind eyes. They didn't speak when they grabbed her from her mat, didn't explain when she asked why. She didn't struggle. There was no fear left inside her, only stillness, the same kind she saw in the stream the day before, right before it rose. She was brought back to the courtyard. Igioma was waiting. She sat tall and rigid on the low stool by the basin, both feet bare, her expression tight with pride and something else, a flicker of unease. Her blistered foot peeked through its bandage. But her voice was sharp. "She will scrub me," she declared. "One last time. With her cursed hands. Let the whole village see it's nothing." The villagers had gathered. Not as many as at the stream, but enough. They stood just outside the gate, watching through the gaps. No one spoke. No one intervened. The stepmother stood behind her daughter, arms folded, lips pressed thin. Her knuckles were white around the edge of her wrapper. Adan was pushed toward the basin. The water inside was clear. So cold. The washcloth floated at the surface like a forgotten tongue. She reached for it. Her fingers were calm. They no longer glowed, not in daylight, but the symbols still shimmered faintly as if waiting to be seen again. She dipped the cloth, squeezed it once. Then approached. Igioma lifted her chin. "Start with my chest," she ordered. "You always start with the back. This time, I want you to look at me when you wash me." Adan said nothing. She raised the cloth, soaked and dripping, pressed it gently against Igioma's chest. And the girl froze. No sound came from her mouth, just a tight gasp caught halfway. Her eyes widened. Her shoulders locked. Her fingers curled into fists. Adan didn't move. The cloth stayed pressed over Igioma's sternum, just above the heart. Then Igioma collapsed. She crumpled in slow motion, knees folding, body sliding off the stool like wet cloth. Her head struck the side of the basin, and she slumped onto the ground, eyes still open, mouth slightly agape. Gasps echoed around the courtyard. Someone screamed. The basin shuddered. Adan turned toward it. The water had begun to darken. A slow ripple moved from the center outward, blooming like ink spilled in milk. It thickened with each second, not blood, not dirt, but something darker, older. A shadow pouring into clarity. The washcloth sank without a sound. The stepmother backed away. No. No, what have you done? Adan didn't answer. The woman took another step back, eyes wide with terror. Then she turned. And ran. Through the gate, past the silent crowd, disappearing into the trees without looking back. No one followed her. Adan stood alone beside the basin. Igioma lay still beside her, breath shallow but steady. Not dead. Not hurt, just emptied. The water calmed. A breeze passed through the courtyard. And for the first time since she had been made a servant, Adan's hands relaxed. Not dropped. Not trembled. Relaxed. Her fingers curled slightly, warm and unburdened. The lines on her skin dimmed into softness. The glow faded. She looked down at her palms, her breath steady. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the basin behind. They never made her wash anyone again. Not after that morning. The stepmother never returned to the village. Some say she ran barefoot into the sacred forest and was turned to bark, her screams echoing in the branches whenever anyone tried to lie. Others say she crossed the hills into silence and buried her own name. Igioma was never seen again. Her absence was not questioned, only feared. The stool by the basin was never used. But Adan stayed. She did not speak much. She smiled rarely. She kept her hands wrapped in white cloth, even on hot days. But people began to come to her. First in whispers, a mother whose child would not stop weeping. A boy whose foot would not heal. A man whose dreams were full of teeth. They came quietly, shame curling around their voices, and they carried one thing always: water. Not to give her, but for her to change. She never touched them. Never laid hand to skin. She would only unwrap her palms slowly, as though removing bandages from something still alive, and hold them over the basin. Her fingers moved in slow circles. The water would shimmer. Then warm. Then still. And when they returned home and used the water, to drink, to bathe, to anoint the sick, healing came. Sometimes slow, sometimes sharp, but always deep. The village grew quiet with awe. Children learned not to play too loudly near her. Chickens avoided her doorway. Even the dogs waited beside the fence, watching her hands like something holy. And in every basin touched by Adan, the water changed. Remembered. It remembered the hands that had dipped cruelty into it. The mouths that had spit over it. The backs it had been poured over with contempt. It remembered and it did not forget. Some who bathed with her blessed water found peace. Wounds closed, fevers broke, restless babies sighed into sleep. But others found pain. The cruel ones. The liars. The ones who hid truth beneath polished faces. They bathed and came out blistered. They drank and spat blood. They soaked their feet and screamed. No one accused her. They didn't dare. Because no one had seen her touch anything since the last bath. No one had seen her lift a stone or pull a weed or pour a jug. She simply sat beside the water. And the water moved for her. Old women said she had the river in her hands. Others said she had been born with the grief of the dead soaked into her blood. The elders gave her no title, but they began to bring bowls of river water each new moon, setting them at her door in silence. She blessed them. She never asked for payment. Only that the water be used well, and only on the worthy. Some came to test her. Proud men with clean robes and arrogant voices. They mocked softly, knelt like they were doing her a favor, and dipped their fingers into the water she had blessed. They left with their hands wrapped in cloth. The lesson did not need repeating. Years passed. Adan grew taller, quieter, older. But the light in her hands never dimmed. She no longer dreamed of steam or pain. She dreamed of calm rivers, of roots growing beneath her feet, of water bending not out of fear but in trust. The symbols on her skin faded, but the memory remained. Sometimes, when no one was watching, she would lift her palms to the moonlight. The marks would glow faintly again, not loud, not angry, just a whisper of what she had survived. And somewhere, in the silence that followed, a basin would fill itself. Because the water remembered. And it would always come home to her.